maybe. Thank you. So are we scared? Oh, it's sacred there. Should be scared of achieving our goals. I think sometimes we often sabotage success when we get near it. And we can be as scared of success or we are as scared of failure. Interesting, isn't it? We might be scared of failure, not doing something, it makes us work hard. But some people, when they get to touching distance of the success, stop, the self-sabotage. Interesting concept. Okay, so today we're going to look about 5 areas. A quick look at goals. What is performance? Our emotions attached to performance. Some of our habits. And I'll use some examples from Alcoholics Anonymous today. And look at feedback, how we get feedback. And the feedback in schools and education, we call it in some ways assessment for learning. What we do in one session or one block of learning might inform how we deliver or how we learn the next block. So feedback is quite continuous, quite fluid, and informs our next step. And if we don't have that process in place, then sometimes we might not make the progress we need to make. So each one of those is there. Okay, so we're going to have a little journey going through these with a couple of exercises thrown in as well for you guys. So let's look at the first one, goals. Are the goals clear? Are they very clear? If they're a bit hazy and they're not, and I've got some other words at the bottom there, but if they're not clear in your own mind at least, and when I say clear, can you see them? Can you write them down? Can you articulate what it is you want to achieve? And when I say vivid, and this is taken from the world of neuro-linguistic programming. When I say vivid, I mean, in a strange way, can you actually see it in your mind's eye? Can you maybe hear people clapping or cheering? Can you see a certificate that proves you've done something? Can you see a big wad of money? Can you attach smells, sounds, sights, touch and taste, your senses, to make that vividness come alive? And that's always interesting. That keeps our hunger going. Emotional is related to the vivid, and we know that emotions, especially when you're younger in life, we can have a triggering event. So when I failed my qualifications at school, the emotion of being on paper a failure triggered me into studying for the next 10 years in this country and overseas, and doing a master's and degrees and GCSEs and all that sort of stuff. And so very emotional for me, my goals were, and it drove me really well. Are they rational, your goals? Are they realistic? Rational. Can we make them? Is it logical to make that goal? Is it realistic? A good thing about goals is, can it be measured? If you can't measure it, it's difficult to know when you've arrived. Is it very specific? Sometimes goals can be that general. Want to lose a load of weight before Christmas, and it might be 3 stone, and that's a bit more specific, but you need to really dial in on the specific stuff that's measurable. And time is an obvious one, that your goals, you've got to put a framework around it in terms of time, because if we don't do that, we'll just run out of steam. So those are some things to think about with your goals. Very important to set that up initially. But also with goals, you can have a goal on a flight path, but you could change midstream. And that could be something good, like if you want to use the airplane analogy, like a Gulf Stream of air coming and swerving you off course, which you think, well, that's not a good thing, but it might be giving you a lift, a shortcut to a better end goal or a different goal. So having goals is important, but taking advantage of life and seeing opportunities and being prepared to change direction, change your goals, maybe small or large term, can be very powerful, and it could be very empowering to you as well. So that's a really interesting point to make. Don't be too rigid on your goals. All those things I mentioned before, those 8 components, for me, it's about having that change. Okay, let's move it on to the next one then. So the second thing we're talking about today, obviously, with performance, and I mentioned CASH before, and CASH is an acronym for knowledge, attitudes, skills, and habits. And if you asked anybody, do you want better performance in life? I guess most people would probably say yes, and most people would probably say want excellent, the best performance. Okay, we understand that. So it does revolve around having the right sort of knowledge. And it's interesting, we get a lot of knowledge from, some people say up to 70% of our knowledge from the workplace. We'll probably get about 20% of a knowledge then from a specific co-worker, and only 10% from training courses. So I'm almost putting myself down here for this training, but a lot of the knowledge we get is within the job ourselves, from other people, and specifically from key workers in there. Okay, your attitude to performance, maybe to take some of the not so good performances and use that as a triggering point from the last slide we had. Your attitude to success, to failure, could give you that insight into how much success you're going to get. You'll probably need some skills at some point to develop your expertise and your performance, and constantly upskilling yourself, as I do on different courses now. I don't play sport anymore, but in terms of my skills, I'm always looking to improve the skills of coaching and do different skill sets within that. I'm always constantly trying to improve. And within that, I've got my habits, something that keeps me on task, that makes me recognize when I'm in flow, that when I'm going really well, but also to reduce my efforts sometimes when I feel as if I'm not quite in flow, so I don't wear myself out and burn myself out. So there are some things to talk about, and we'll pick up these strands indiscreetly as we go along. So performance needs cash. Now I'm going to show you and go through this little chart for you about performance curve. That's the chart. It won't make that much sense to you, but I'm going to strip it down, and then we're going to build it up again. So if I said to you that if you see that little line in the middle there, that sometimes over time performance can initially have a little improvement for no reason at all. We just start something new, beginner's luck, for instance, but very quickly, very often, it can go downhill. But hopefully, over time, doing the right sort of things will get a higher skill level. And the way I categorize this is looking at these things. So the top left, we call this the unconscious incompetent. So you're oblivious to what you need to do. So it could be somebody driving a car, gets in a car and drives okay to a point, but then maybe has a crash, and they don't realize they're that bad at driving. Maybe blaming other people. They may just think it's a bit of bad luck that I'm doing it this way, and I'll get it right next time. So a blind approach to things. And you could be floating through work, if you're not a car analogy, floating through work now thinking like that. But as we go through things here in life, learning a new skill, improving our performance, we sometimes very quickly become aware that we're not performing anywhere near other people, and certainly not to our potential. And then we become conscious that we're incompetent. And this is where the pressure, you're unsure, and there maybe need to be a real investment in practice and our resources to improve. But given that we've got the opportunity to do that, we can then work towards what's called a conscious competence in performance, where and it's hard work being competent. It's like driving a car. Where's the first gear? Where's the second gear? Where's the road there? Let's not bump into anybody. And you're doing it relatively safely, but it's hard work. You're surviving, you're practicing, you're getting feedback. And eventually, I don't know how long this takes, it's all relative, we start to blossom and thrive and flow. So it could be that now we can drive a car from where I live in Preston to Birmingham without knowing any signposts and just going down the road, no some blink of an eye, and I'm there in 90 minutes. And that's called the unconscious competent. And I think when you've got good performance in life, you're not thinking about everything at once, because that will surely interrupt your performance. But you zone in on the key things, but you're in a state of higher level. And performance comes from that ability to make things simple and to do things easily and calmly. So we might go through a phase, a process there. So in performance then, and again, depends what mindset you're coming from here and what sort of era, I suppose, but we all have this comfort zone, that security blanket where there's very little learning, but we're okay, we're safe. And that's okay sometimes. Then we have the green stretch zone. We've got more learning, and we've got maybe some security that if we get it wrong, it's not the end of the world, and we're learning something, we're developing and improving. Some people like to push us right to that red zone, and good simple example of this might be training with the SAS, and you must run through that brick wall, you must jump down that cliff face with the abseil, and you must swim through the water. And there is a place for that, but for many people's performance, that red zone activity could actually stop us, and that could hinder us, and it could create scars for us. So it's one of those things that, now here's an interesting question, that do we perform at the expense of our mental and emotional well-being? Yeah, which I write articles for different sports journals, and they say it's all about performance, and whatever else happens, they've got to deal with it themselves. But it's a very narrow-minded view that, and we know in the media at the moment with different people like Simone Biles in gymnastics, Ben Stokes in cricket, Tyrone Mings in football. You know, there are certainly at Wimbledon, Emma Raducanu, there are certain performers now who are struggling with that performance at the expense of mental health, and they're actually being good and being vulnerable and coming out and talking about it. So the message for this slide for me is, if you want to have better performance, you'll have to come out of that comfort zone regularly. You'll have to get into that stretch zone. The red zone is something to be aware of, not to be scared of. If you're spending a lot of time in the red zone, really pushing yourself, there could be a backfiring moment that could have more than serious repercussions for you. So don't get caught up in that, I must do everything at once, and I must be the best, and I must jump through this hoop, literally and metaphorically. It's about holding that performance and recognizing that. So here's 5 key questions for you. And if your score 1 is a low score and 10 is a good high score, have a think about this. This is rhetorical. And if you want to put something in the chat box, you can. Here we go. Do you have the knowledge and attitude to keep learning, to keep applying, to keep performing? Okay, so that's really hinting at when things go well, when things don't go so well. You know, do you have the knowledge and attitude? Okay, bit of the cash bit coming in there. So you can keep your scores. If it's out of 50, this, so you can put them down on a note paper for yourself. 1 is low, 10 is high. So the higher the score, the better. Number 2, do you have resilience? Here we go, but not at the expense of well-being, and ultimately at the expense of performance. So I talk about the caveat of resilience. Resilience has been told to us, everybody, it's a great thing to keep pushing, to be adaptable, to get to the next level. But there can be a price if we constantly keep doing that. We're in that red zone on the previous slide. So have a think about that for a second. Yeah. Do you have user-friendly resilience? That's a good way of putting it, isn't it? Number 3, only 5 questions. Do you work with your emotions or fight them, self or other people? Okay, interesting one. Do you work with your emotions in flow? Okay, no problems, Jenny. She's joined us. She's in the room, is Jenny. So do you work with emotions or fight them all the time? And that can drain us very, very quickly. The next one. Does your motivation impact your ability to develop and maintain good habits? So have you got low motivation, or do you have medium to high motivation? And does that impact your ability to develop good habits? So if you don't feel it today, do you let everything go by the wayside and just drop it all? And you know, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? And the final one is, do you use feedback to develop performance and reach your potential? Do you get feedback certainly from yourself? You get feedback from trusted others. You get feedback from strangers even. You get feedback from non-professionals, feedback from line managers. And I think if you don't get the feedback and use it, that could be a real gray area if you're developing performance or lack of performance. So you could have a score there out of 50. And I'm not going to say what's a right score or a wrong score, but I would certainly say if you're over 5 in each of those components, so over 25 onwards, it's looking pretty steady. If you are below that, then maybe there's an area that you need to look at in terms of your performance. I need to improve my score. Everything takes time, Michelle. Everything takes time, but recognizing it is surely more important and get you back on that path rather than ignoring it. And a lot of people have that ostrich approach of head in the sand, not want the feedback. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't need it. Well, actually, I can look at something. I don't have to implement it, but I can be aware of it. and I can ditch it if I need to. Okay, so just a little thing for you, 5 key questions, the score there for you. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Let's look at number 3. This might not make sense to you at the moment. We're talking about the emotional side of performance. And I'm just going to interrupt you with a couple of examples of people who talk about what's called the elephant and the rider. And there's Chip and Dan Heath, who actually came to prominence before the chimp paradox. And their book was out a year before theirs came out, Steve Peters. And Jonathan had it. And they both talked about the emotional side of the brain. So if you want to make any progress in life or any decisions or any performance improvement, you can split the brain into 2 parts. The rational logical brain, the prefrontal cortex, and we call this the rider, the rational side of things. And then underneath that, we've got the elephant, the emotional side. And some people refer to this like the amygdala, the limbic system, the emotion side of things. And we know that we can have all the rational decisions, but sometimes we can sabotage ourselves because it doesn't feel right emotionally. And if you want a ratio factor here, these writers talk about the elephant, the thing that the rider logical brain sits upon, is 6 times stronger than the rational brain. So if your emotional side is not in sync with the rational side, so yeah, it's a rational thing to do, but emotionally I don't feel right about it, then you won't do it. And no matter what emotions and motivations you've got associated with it, the elephant's going to win every time. So you've got to work the 2 together. It's got to stand up and stack up rationally and logically, but you've got to feel your emotions that it's the right thing to do. If you don't, you're going to have standstill. So some examples of that, why we get these emotions, and we might talk about chemicals here of dopamine, the reward hormone, and adrenaline, certainly, and cortisol, the stress hormone. But when we say, for instance, left-hand side, we fall in love, then that emotional brain takes over the rational side. And we could do things like meeting somebody, fall in love and spend a fortune on them, for instance, and we can't afford it, but we do it. So the emotional side is being fueled over the rational side sometimes. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm going to give you an example of how that emotion can drive behavior. And that's the key phrase. And again, on the right-hand side, emotion can drive behavior, and it might be quite pertinent to talk about a driver here going to a petrol station and trying to fill up with fuel and gets upset and then jumps out of his car and starts an argument and a fight with somebody. It's totally irrational. We're all in the same boat, but people react in different ways when that emotion gets the better of them. So that emotion can drive our behaviors, and we know it's not right to do it, but we still do it. And this is where we become aware of the elephant and the rider in our goals especially. And I'll give you a couple of examples from the world of business. There's a guy called John Stegner who worked for this massive company in the States, and they produced, well, they worked in a lot of chemical industries, and they used a lot of gloves. And every month they had a meeting of the board, and the accountant, John Stegner, said, listen, you're losing about $10,000 every month here because the gloves you're buying in en masse, they might seem cheap, but the reality is that some of these gloves are the same hand, so 2 left-handed or 2 right-handed. The quality is poor. They don't last as long. We're constantly replacing them. And the board said, yeah, but it's all right. It's working well. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. And he kept saying the same thing each meeting, and they didn't listen to him. So the last meeting he went to, he just put the gloves on the table. And every 10 seconds, he put about 5 or 6 gloves on the table. We just wasted that. We'll waste the next one, the next one. And within a few minutes, the gloves had piled up on the table. And that emotional image of that stopped these directors in the track. So the figures on a 3-line account didn't make much sense to them. They did, but it didn't grab their attention. This grabbed their attention. So another things we do this in marketing sometimes when there's a big campaign in America about buying a healthier milk. And they found that they put all the advertisements on TV, but people weren't still buying the healthier milk. This is a government-backed campaign. And eventually they put the milk next to the cashier. So it's the last thing they bought with a big sign. Have you done your last bit of shopping? This is what's good for your heart. And they had to trip over it to get it. And the other one on the left-hand side, who's Donald Burr, was a healthcare practitioner, talked about shaping the path. And he talked about how they could save 1,000 lives in 18 months by simply producing a procedure that would help emergency care. So there's certain steps you must go through. And they produced a 10-point plan, easy to memorize, not too complicated, but a consistency of approach to care. And once they had this across a number of hospitals, and then the doctors involved themselves in that learning, they improved it a bit, and then they shared their knowledge and experiences. They were all working on the same side, and 1,000 lives were saved in 18 months. So it's shaping that path performance. Okay. So what are we talking about here in terms of this emotional sides? So the winners are people who learn to do hard things with emotional integrity. Okay, so things that they don't want to do, but emotional integrity makes them, they don't do something against their emotions. They work with their emotions because they know they have longer term benefits. To change most often happens by speaking to people's feelings. So if you're in a business place now, you might get many reasons why to do something. If you can speak to people's feelings, you've got a better chance of changing that behavior. Build people up rather than rip them down, and praise every small act. These are little things you can do to help that emotional elephant ride along to the future. Which leads us neatly into number 4, to keep the consistency of going. We've got this goal, we've got this performance, we know about the elephant, we're working with our emotions, but how can we do it day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, decade to decade, especially if that retirement age is getting further in the future? So the less motivation needed, the easier the habit. It's a pretty obvious thing to say, isn't it? But the interesting bit is, if you read all the books, many books on motivation, they'll talk about motivation being finite, it's limited. There's only a certain amount. And I'm very well motivated, but I know when I get to the end of that well, I need to refuel it, to recharge it. So you can't just keep going and going and going, because motivation will give up at some point and it will drain you away. And so, some people say about diets, for instance, the strictness of a diet means it's doomed to failure from using the word diet, restricting or something. We must be able to flow, suit the emotions, and emotions in dieting might be that we can have some chocolate, but we don't have it too often. We maybe have lower calorie chocolate, but we do indulge ourselves. So we keep the motivation, the well of motivation up there, and we don't feel guilty for doing that. The second bit of motivation, and we're talking about the less we think about it, the more sustainable it is. If we're creating routines that we don't have to think about, things that we make healthier choices in food that we don't even think about. Oh, I want that food. It's healthy for me, and probably it's definitely got less calories, and it makes you feel better. And I feel momentum going with my weight loss and feeling good about life. So it's not really a challenge to my motivation. So any good motivation doesn't involve thinking. This is what we call dialed in. Yeah. And there's an interesting book by Charles Duhigg, talks to the power of habits. Okay. And this is very powerful. It comes down to something we've all got, this cue, routine, and reward. So habit is an automated behavioral pattern of these 3 things. You have a cue that you want something. You have a routine you go through, and then you get a reward. And I mentioned before about dopamine being the reward hormone. And that could be, a cue is like mid-afternoon. The routine is go for my jammy donuts at the top there. And the reward is I feel good afterwards and everything's great and life feels great and get on with the last 2 hours of work. But sometimes this can be demotivating for us, and it can work against us. And we've seen this in the labs. When we click of a door, the mice run to the end and get the cheese. So that click of the door is the cue. The routine is then we run further to the end and get the cheese. And it could be a break time, get the cigarette and get the pleasure high. So if you smoke, that could be something you do. But Duke University did a study of 4% of daily actions, not decisions, just responses to habits. So we're doing things out of habits, but if these habits are not producing good outcomes for us, and probably more medium to longer term outcomes, then that's not a good thing to be in place. Yeah. So we have bad habits that we sometimes don't know we're doing. And the brain can't tell the difference between good and bad habits. Yeah, this is where education, this is where these webinars, this is where this awareness comes, and then you to take responsibility and change some of your habits. But the more you think about it, the harder it's going to be in some ways. So the secret is to learn to observe cues and rewards, and we can change routines. Okay. So look at that equation, cue, routine, reward. If you observe the cues and rewards, okay, the routine can change to get better outcomes. And they use this in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they have 12 steps, 90 meetings in 90 days. And there's an aspect of spirituality in there. It helps though, and it's very successful, Alcoholics Anonymous, because they use the same cue to get the same reward, but it shifts the routine. Develop new behaviors that are non-drinking routines. So they asked what are the rewards from drinking? So escape, relief, companionship. And then they say, okay, so can you get these from other things like exercise, growing social friends, getting a better job? And once you change that reward around from that, they've learned better alternative routines to deal with stress. So when they go straight for that bottle, they say, hang on a second, the reward might be that short-term hit, but the long-term is going to stay in this pattern. If you want to change that pattern, change that routine of going for a drink and think about the outcomes that you want in life. So let's go to some exercise. Let's go for better food. Let's go for talking and listening. So the secret to any behavior is changing those routines. Talking about routines, you might have heard of this guy, Stephen Covey. He talks about the 7 habits of highly successful people. And there are people who do his courses, and then these disciples go and teach this around the world, which I'm not saying it's wrong, but you got to take from it what you want to take from it. Some people, like I say, are very disciples about this, and other people, I can use that. And they look at how many habits do we have. Remember from the last slide, I talked about habits. If you don't know using them and they're good, that's a good thing, but the brain can't differentiate. So I want you to think now of these things. Are you doing them? Are they good? So 7 habits could be, be proactive about your choices, about your language in life. You know, if you can be going to be a victim, something's going to affect you. Can you see a problem before it arises? So in your habits, be proactive. Visualize your future with the end in mind. So this is a bit like goals. And if you can't see the end, how can you get there? What does the end look like? I said before, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it touch like? Can you write it? Can you draw it? Can you feel it? Can you contextualize it? It's very important to have that. Can you prioritize? So if you want success in your performance, prioritization of values and roles and broad priorities, very important to be that ruthless in some ways, nicely ruthless. This is a great thing of good habits, seeing a win-win situation. You don't always have to win at somebody else's expense. If 2 people can win, that's better than 1 person winning. And if you're a manager in an organization, this integrity, maturity, and abundant mentality is something that will help you get to success. And it's another example of the elephant and the rider. If you're trying to win at all costs, satisfying your emotional desire, then the rational side is not to get satisfied. Communication, a very simple one. Do you listen to understand and not to respond? Okay, some people listen and they're looking to interrupt, or do you listen to understand the problem first of all? It's an interesting habit, isn't it? Teamwork, open-mindedness, and challenge. It goes without saying, you can't win on your own. And you have downtime to sharpen the saw, physical, social, emotional, mental, spiritual, wherever it is for you to then get back up to recharge that motivation, to relook at your goals, to make sure that elephant's in check, to make sure you've got the right habits there. On a previous presentation, we talked about anchoring for performance. So I just want to give you a quick one, which I do in the world of sport. And this is based on neuro-linguistic programming. And anchors are something that anchors us, hence the word, to get ready for a state of performance. So all these other things I've talked about this morning could be a part of a process. The actual performance could be on 3 sort of anchors. It could be a visual anchor, something you see, an auditory anchor, something you hear, or a kinesthetic, something you touch or feel. So, you know, some of the anchors I talk about seeing something in the mind's eye. So I might have a situation where I've got to do an exam, and I could get quite nervous about it. But as a part of me, once I failed my exams at school, every exam's in 60 and I've always passed. So I actually look at that image of me passing exams, and actually I don't look at it with trepidation, look at it with excitement. I can't wait to show people what I know. So that's a real shift in thinking. So I have that visual image of me passing these exams, getting my certificates, having a better job, having a better quality of life. And that's an anchor I have. If I want to really emboss that into my mind, I can do some breathing activities. And this is where the NLP comes in. So if I show to the camera now, I can breathe in, hold, and as I breathe out, squeeze my finger and thumb together, but think about this image of certificates I've got because I've worked hard, prepared hard, I've enjoyed the challenge of an exam. And I do that a number of times to get myself in that zone of a visual anchor to say, I've done this before, I can do it again. There's the evidence. I'm constantly playing images in my head of the evidence I've got. Some people like that touch and that feel of things. So if somebody's got a performance of something, they get very agitated. They might have some sort of stress ball that they squeeze in tight and hold the muscle in tight at the same time, the same breathing. So it could be squeeze. And it's one of those things, whatever works for you. So they use it in sport when they visualize, say, a penalty kick in rugby, the ball going over the post, and they're visualizing in the mind's eye, they're calm, they're breathing down, they're not distracted from the crowd. And they're in some routine where they're anchoring that feeling. This might take a bit more of exploration for you, but it is at the heart of many good performances that you can zone in to get yourself in that state, that zone to perform, as they call it. And come back to this if we need to. The last bit is 360-degree feedback. We need feedback for us to progress. You can't live in a shadow all the time. You've got to look out there and look for areas in life. And it's not about competition life, it's about collaboration. So I'll give you 4 areas of feedback. You could have a test of competency in your job now. You could have a line manager review. You could have your own self-awareness. Where am I in the organization? Am I at the top, near the bottom? What do your peers think about you? Can anybody tell me through the chat box or interrupt me, what is the most accurate type of feedback out of all those 4 that consistently comes out top as the most accurate and revealing about how to get improvement through feedback? What's the most reliable set of data? Here we go. That's how now they're coming in. Carly Vines, peers. Matthew Cotton, line managers. Somebody's going to talk to me there as well, I think.
It was me. I was going to say test of competency.
Test of competency. I can see the manager in you and the director in you there, Jenny. The actual answer from many studies is peers. Peers is the answer. They know you better than you know yourself. And they're more accurate than many tests of competency, line manager views, and your own self-awareness. So self-awareness is interesting, that I don't know myself as well as other people do, because there's probably that emotional elephant involved there somewhere as well. So it's just an interesting thing to look about that, isn't it? You know, that the peers, they're the ones we think, oh, they're my threats. Actually, they could be your support to getting better at what you do. And I come back to that word, it's collaboration, not competition. Okay. So, you know, if you're talking about feedback in a simple thing here, and we use this in education quite a bit, you know, to perform anywhere, you know, and that's the essence of today's talk, and using feedback, identify your self-esteem and your qualities of who you are, you know, respect and cherish. Almost, you can go to an extent where you're not ego worshiping, but you're worshiping the fact that you're on a journey. Yeah. Then you've got to demonstrate this behavior, because it's no use thinking you are good at something. Your perception of something must be matched by the reality of performance. And when we do the performance, whether it's good or bad, then we start getting that feedback from others, this fine tuning. Don't do that, do a bit more of this. I want to do that in the future. And then you go and put these ideas and this feedback into further practice, and you're not scared to do that, to go into that arena again and perform. And at some point, you might need the last one there, the nerve calming and that passion to look at the elephant, to drive you on. And it's a combination of this. And it's quite cyclical. that you keep refining, you keep going back into that performance arena, picking things up, being aware of things, getting that feedback, calming yourself down if you need to. And some people, the calming might be necessary because you're overexcited, not nervous, but overexcited. So that's a simple cycle that will get you around that. In the center, you've got the comfort zone, the stretch zone, the red zone. And hopefully that'll stop you getting to the red zone too much, but certainly into the green zone. And we call it in teaching, plan, perform, evaluate. Plan something, perform it, evaluate it, and keep going round and round and round. And even the most articulate and experienced performers will have some measure of that. It can become quite automatic, as I mentioned that diagram before. You're very unconscious competent. You're doing something in flow, you don't know you're good at something. You do, but it's effortless. And when it's effortless and you're in flow, there's probably a lot of work like this that's gone into it. So to finish off with, I'm going to give you some rhetorical open coaching questions here. Okay. So don't answer me, just think about it. What is your biggest barrier? Think about it for a second. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is low stress and 10 is high stress, how do I rate my score right now? Okay, with this barrier, is it bugging me all the time? If it is, it's probably a 9 or a 10. If it's not bugging me, it's irritating me, maybe a 4 or a 5. How will I feel about these barriers in 6 months? 1 or several barriers. How will I feel about this barrier or barriers in 6 months' time? When it's, February next year, how will I feel about it? What one thing can I do today to reduce my barriers? What's the one thing I can do right now even to reduce my barriers? And you might be doing it now, this awareness of something, not letting it hurt you, not procrastinating, putting it off. I don't like that thought, I'm not going to go there. You're doing it right now, you're facing that fear. Have I got any evidence to suggest my view is 100% correct? So is this barrier really a barrier? Or if it is a barrier, is it this as big a barrier as we think? Or is it actually less? And it could be less than I'm thinking about it more. It could be more because I'm thinking about it less. It's an interesting statement, isn't it? We can put it away a bit, ignore it, and then it becomes bigger, like it grows in the dark, like a mushroom. Or I can think about it all the time, and that magnifies it. Whichever way it is, you're going to magnify it if you don't watch it. Number 6, who else can give me support? Okay, parents, friends, teachers, internet, peers, work peers are good ones. Can I really put my brains and effort into attacking this challenge before it's too big? Okay. So can I really do something about it before it gets out of my control? And it could be public speaking, for instance, where the thought of public speaking brings you out in a cold sweat. Can I make a commitment to at least keep trying to reduce my barriers, to not lock it away, to face it, to articulate it, to get support, to challenge it, to take the fear out of fear? Yeah. And on a scale of 1 to 10 now, how do you rate your score now? From number 2 on the board, less than a minute ago, how do you feel about your score now? We've thought about this fear, this barrier, given it a score. What support can we get? Not hiding it away, looking at it, challenging it, making a commitment to it. Anybody's score has gone up or down there? Hopefully gone down. So your score is a bit, you're not stressed now, you're thinking about it, you're busting the myth of something. We're always scared of the unknown, aren't we? Like COVID, for instance, the unknown. And we know a bit more about it now, but there's still a lot of unknowns about it. And that could really affect us. So by bringing things into the light, being vulnerable, looking at our strengths and weaknesses and getting the objective feedback from our peers, which is the best one, then we can make progress. Okay. That's some, the website for Kaplan there. This has been recorded. So if you're not here today, you want to look at some other stuff, come back to us. Any questions we'll take via Jenny now.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all those areas for support. So I'm going
to, I think just to reiterate what you were saying there, Ross, on the previous slide of where else to go for support, here is your training provider and Kaplan wants to support you. So if there's anything that's concerning you, do get in touch with us, speak to your talent coach as an apprentice or your tutor otherwise. and we're here to help. So what we don't want is anybody to be worrying on their own and not reaching out.
Okay. At the bottom there, October 25th at 12, the second of the autumn winter series. But that's for the future. Let me take it off screen for a second. I like to see people's happy smiling faces. I'm seeing Jenny there. Are there any questions from people here? We've got a couple of minutes left to ask any questions right now. I'm happy to receive them by email later on or via Jenny as a conduit. But is there anything that's burning people's minds now about performance, about improving it, recognizing those goals, that emotional driver, the habits and motivations? I'll stop talking for a second, see if anybody comes back with a question for me. I could do the old, be sorry for a 60-year-old man, ask me one question, please. That'd make my day much better. So I always go on that emotional side of somebody else, the elephant, 6 times stronger than the rational brain. So who's going to help an old man out by giving me a question now that actually might help somebody else as well? Okay. How about, okay.
Food for thought, Michelle says.
Thank you, Michelle. It's always food for thought, and it's like any training, Michelle. I can bring it to the table. I can make it learning. I can try and make it a bit of fun because that helps the dopamine and our memory levels. But ultimately, it's about you guys doing something different if you want better performance. And then if you're really good, to measure that improvement. So those are the 2 things we talk about in education, of doing something different after training, then measuring the effectiveness of that change. And I think that's very powerful, very simple but clever thing to do.
Just a comment about liking the elephant and the rider approach. And I absolutely agree, that really resonated with me. And sometimes, Ross, it feels as though it's that phrase about responding and not reacting, to try and almost take the emotional, immediate reaction out of a decision. Yeah,
we talked last time, didn't we, about green respond or red react. And red react was something immediate that's a knee-jerk, and respond in a green way is more calculating, more considered return. And I think, you can do the breathing exercise and think about that as a concept. But that simple concept of the rider wanting to do something, it's the right thing to do. Why is it not working? Because the emotion's not sitting up. And that could be somebody in a company doing something in the company doesn't feel right for them. And it could be something that they're doing in terms of away from work that doesn't sit right with them. I'm in a professional job, and I'm living in a bad house, in a bad environment, and bad work friends, or bad friends in my work house, and that could be affecting me emotionally. So solving that elephant and calming the elephant will make everything a lot easier. You can't force it.
Well, I'm going to take 2 phrases from today. One is eat the chocolate. I quite like that, which is probably the wrong thing, but in small quantities to not prevent us from having it, but also control the elephant. I'm going to rethink about that one.
Well, I won't say control it. I would say recognize it and work with it.
Work with the elephant.
Because the elephant will control you. And that's okay. If you've got those good emotions, and a lot of people I used to work with, a lot of challenged young children a long time ago, and this emotion was the driver all the time, and they responded in so many ways that were poo habits, and it wasn't their fault. But if you can understand the elephant, be aware of it, and work with that emotion, you're going to get better outcomes. It'll feel good and it'll feel right,
Well, we were slightly out of time. I just apologise. I had immense IT problems, and including everything crashing. So sorry not to have joined for the first 10 minutes, but a big thank you to Ross for kicking off our autumn-winter series of mental fitness. We really look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be back on the 25th of October, and we're talking about stress management in that session. So do join us then, and thank you very much for attending today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, I just lost my screen there for a bit. Let's see if I can get it back again down here. There we go. Okay.
I'm just going to stop the recording.